Grundig, who just won the Cable TV Academy Award, tells me that his favorite crooner way back then was Bing Crosby. How could we not mention Bing Crosby? How could I not mention that a very dear friend of mine named Sheldon Zimmett, noted producer, brought this man. I wanted this man more than... What is Sheldon doing with you? Putting on a movie or a TV?
Yes, as the journey I made has interested the film industry, and an Oscar-winning movie producer is seeking director and screenwriter to make this something real.
This fabulous gentleman, my friends, walked from the bottom of the world to the top of the world. And he's done a book called The Longest Walk. How do you feel about being on a show like mine, Mr. Meegan?
I'm happy to be on your show because yours is the longest-running talk show in the world, and you're the longest talk, and I'm the longest walk.
Longest walk, longest talk. We had to meet, right?
We had to meet, and so we have. I'm honored.
I can't tell you how honored I am. This man's trek of 19,019 miles is officially recognized as the largest, longest journey ever accomplished on foot, and it gave him 8 world records, including the record for the longest walk ever. Were you, as a kid, were you a hiker? Were you a walker? People wonder about the beginning of all this.
You're right to look at the beginning, because what I lived was a dream, and my journey was a dream. And when I was a 6-year-old boy, I used to wander around my town of Raynham in England, and I used to imagine making great journeys. As a young boy, I used to read the books of the great English travellers, and something within me wanted to emulate if I could. But I was never a very physical kid, you know, I kept that secret within me.
It's like a 97-pound weakling like me almost, right?
Yeah.
But this devotion to walking, or this trek, this famous trek, was that a self-imposed assignment? Anybody tell you to do it, or did you just figure it out for yourself, George?
I was a seaman, and I voyaged the oceans on ships, right. And I began to get a sense that the planet we live on is extremely small. A ship can reach from London down to the bottom of South Africa in a few weeks. So the world is rather small, and I felt it conceivable that somebody could in fact cross the planet on foot. And so I saved the money I could, and without sponsorship, entered the road and tried to do what nobody had ever achieved before.
May we ask part of the route? I know you can't give the whole route, but when I said before, I figured out from what I read, from the bottom to the top. Give us part of the route, George.
I went through South America towards the Andes. I went through from Tierra del Fuego through Argentina, Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, into Panama. This took over 2 years. And then Central America, Panama, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, then into Mexico. And then after 3.5 years, I popped out on the Rio Grande, Texas. And then that was the promised land to me. I needn't go hungry anymore, and I could restore my health, which had taken a battering in Latin America. And then I came over through Texas through to Georgia. I had the honor of a meeting with President Jimmy Carter at his home. I
had the honor through the years. I want to say this, George. Don't hate me for this. This man really did it. This man really did the walking. But I've had the honor of chatting with many, what's the word, frauds, like people, marathon runners or bicycle marathoners who we found out later on. I found out that they took the bus half the way. You know what I mean? How did anybody ever ask you to verify or authenticate any proof? Any affidavit of mileage? How can people really and truly, like I know, like the other Today Show knew, or like Sheldon Zimmett knew, how do people really know that you went every inch on foot?
It's a marvelous question.
Thank you.
I was on the road for several years.
Yes.
I was alone principally. I could have conceivably spent a couple of years with Howard Hughes locked up in the Managua Hilton Intercontinental Hotel there. The answer is it took me 7 years. And what would be the point of cheating on something as that? Because I knew that my life would, I'd have to be answering questions from people such as yourself, Mr. Franklin, forever after. And to live a lie is the most difficult thing.
Awful. What might have been, I'm chatting here with George Meegan of The Longest Walk, a Dodd Mead book, a perennial, not perennial yet, but an automatic bestseller. What might have been the longest stretch, George, without seeing any other human being?
Ooh, a few days.
A few days. And did you make any friends maybe along the way, to the extent that you might want to come back someday at a more leisurely pace and revisit those? Was that not possible on a trip like that?
I initially traveled with my girlfriend, who became my wife, and so we were together, so I wasn't entirely alone during the southern section and through Patagonia.
That's great.
Which is going on for several weeks, in fact. Sorry, could you repeat that?
No, I mean, you made a few friends along the way.
Oh,
possibly,
many. People think of my long distance as miles. It's not miles.
Not miles.
It's people and it's time. And just think, when you look at the map of the world and you look at all those communities and villages, I know somebody in every single community and village from the top of the world to the bottom of the world. So I had the great pain to say goodbye to people who were so dear to me. And sometimes in Latin America and South America, the village would all come out and they'd stand there and we'd be wrapped up in ponchos, and sometimes the people would weep because of the sadness. They knew that we'd never see each other again. And they say, George, please stay with us forever. And I say, I can't. I must finish the dream. I must cross the Blue Mountain.
You know, you're talking about the people now that you met along the road, along the voyage, that were hospitable. But how about those that was anybody, you know, any life-threatening moments, or anybody who was not hospitable, even hostile, George? Or?
Even hostile, my word. The world, the most dangerous of animals in the world are actually people.
Really?
And in some countries, Argentina, I would single out, it was at the height of the dirty war.
Wow.
The soldiers are dangerous. The criminal elements seem to be in the military. Sometimes even the police. I reached Panama City after 2 years, and on the last day in South America, I was attacked by a knife gang, and I came as close as anybody ever could to perishing.
This young Englishman, ladies and gentlemen, went, now let's try and get the dates, from where to where, on what dates to what date. That might make it official, you know, George? I
began my walk in 1977, January 26,
right.
And it was the week of the Jimmy Carter inaugural.
Yes.
And I finished in September 19th, 1983, which was into the Reagan period.
It's incredible. And what might have been the most treacherous rainfall?
I crossed the Darien Gap, the notorious Darien Gap between Colombia and Panama.
Yes.
And I'd planned and I'd worked so hard to reach that region before the rainy season would cut me off. Yes. And leave me there. And I was so successful in that rainforest that I arrived there in the dry season, and we had the most terrible problems with water. We were running thirsty.
Ouch.
And that was in the
How do you solve that?
Well,
can't.
We had, I guess, half a pint of water between 6 people, and you take it sip at the time. In the mornings, you would wake up, and the dew would form on the leaves, and you would get the leaf, and you'd lick the leaf, and on that leaf would be insects, and you'd crunch your way through this. You're so desperate to drink that would be no problem.
Boy. Did you, now let's mention, you mentioned that you started with the Japanese girlfriend.
Yes.
She became your wife?
Yes, she did.
And you've got 2 children now?
Yes.
Named?
Well, Ayumi, whose birthday is next week. Her name is Ayumi, which means walk in Japanese.
Walk, one baby named Walk, that figures, right?
And the next baby is named Jeffrey Susumu, and Susumu means keep going.
Keep going. You're a marvelous man. What could be the financial rewards? I mean, besides the book, what can some potential long-distance walkers look forward to by way of? I got a great idea for you, is to make a commercial for a walking shoe or a sneaker company or whatever, right?
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Has to happen.
I did my journey unsponsored. I lived for years without any money. I crossed these countries with nothing. I only lived and existed because of the goodness of the kind souls around with me. And I lived in New York for a period. I lived with a lady called Mrs. Nita Camp. And without money, without rent, they shared their food with me. And this is typical of that journey. The financial rewards are none. I was ruined financially. I just had my savings as a seaman, and I finished with nothing, and my family had to suffer greatly because we just had nothing. I
guarantee you that after the show tonight or this morning, you'll be discovered for an endorsement for a sports shoe company. That has to be, George. It's just got to be. If you're willing to do it.
Well,
we had the daughter of the Lone Eagle on here recently, you know, Reeve Lindbergh, and she told me after the show how Charles Lindbergh turned down $100,000 for one night at the Palace Theater. Turned down. He was very conservative, very shy. They wanted him to make a movie. He wouldn't do anything. But I think you got to accept some of these offers if they come along.
To help my family, of course. Although I have no money and travel without any money, I was truly a millionaire of experience, and I've always sensed that, no matter how hard life became.
Did you send back any mail, maybe, George, to people who collect stamps or whatever? Did you do any writing along the way so far?
I spent as much money on postage as I did on food.
He's a marvelous man. He's a busy man. I want to wish him much, much happiness. The book is you got to read this book. You got to love it. You got to love the man. So far as how this changed your perspective on life, your outlook. If you had to sort of crystallize how this trek changed your whole philosophy of life, how might you crystallize or summarize that statement, George?
I fell in love with the vulnerable planet we live on, and I fell totally in love with humanity in all its various forms. And I'd like to mention there's a March of Dimes going off on Sunday the 24th, and I'd like to try and help the people there. I'd like to try and give back to the world something which it so greatly gave to me.
Big walkathon coming up.
Yes, and in fact the distance those people would do is exactly 1,000th of the distance that I covered, which, looked at in planetary terms, have you ever been abroad, Joe? Do you travel much?
Once or twice, but that's all. But
where did you go?
Paris.
Okay. Imagine when you're on that plane, you went from New York to Paris. Think of that, walking that distance, and then coming back to New York, and then going once again to Paris, and then going off to Moscow. That's all on foot. That's the equivalent distance.
This man stood on top of the world and stared down at the ultimate human challenge. You did, and I'm proud of you.
Thank you,
The longest walk. George Meegan, the big party is beginning. I want to tell you that I can't wait to see the movie and the TV series. You got a great man there with Sheldon Zimmett. Sheldon is the best. We shall return with the best of the 1950s following these words as we thank Mr. Meegan, author of The Longest Walk, the greatest man. Be right back.